Good morning, delegates, and welcome to day number 2 of the World Congress of Family here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Good to be with you this morning, and Bill, thank you for those opening remarks. Delegates, if you would open up your program this morning, you would see that at the top of the page of October 28th, our organizers have given us the theme this morning of the value of the natural family. And this morning we're going to discuss that reality and that theme in this session. The three of us come to contribute to an important conversation that's happening across America today in light of a dramatic decision that was rendered in June 26th of this year, as the United States Supreme Court informed us that any of the laws that had been established since the founding of our country that had established marriage as an institution of a man and a woman being married together and being defined in that way were no longer lawful, and that there was now a new constitutional right for people of the same sex to be engaged in the formal relationship of marriage. As we engage this conversation about the now what after the Supreme Court decision of 2015, we're all a bit confused, we're all a bit uncertain as to how all this plays out in the days and weeks and months to follow. But as we have this conversation, as we engage this new era of American social life, we have to begin to engage with one another more and more directly. And this morning, I want to suggest to you that we start with understanding that each and every one of us come to this discussion, to this conversation, in this new American understanding of marriage with a point of view. We call that a worldview. We come to the situations that we live in this life with certain beliefs. That can be a sacred or a spiritual worldview, or it can be a secular worldview. And this morning, unapologetically, obviously, I come to you as a Christian. I come to you as one ordained into the Christian clergy, as a local pastor here in Utah, who believes and is informed in my beliefs by a belief that there is a God in heaven, that the Bible is a revelation of understanding who He is and how we are to live our lives. And so I come to this conversation, this important conversation, with that perspective, with that worldview. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that we need to be unapologetic about that we need to engage this conversation knowing that even though sometimes society tells us today that if you have religious feelings or spiritual feelings or church feelings about various things, that those are more private things, but we can't bring those into the public square, and we can't accept that. We've got to engage fully as participants in this democracy called the United States, and our voice is as important as any other voice. And as we engage in the topic and in this conversation, I would be reminded that ours is a nation of faith. Ours is a heritage of Judeo-Christian values and understandings, and we are a nation of many different kinds of faith. And our voice is as important in this conversation, in this time of transition and uncertainty, as any other voice. And we need to stand with confidence as we begin this conversation. Our founders were people of faith. They were informed as well by a biblical understanding of God and the values as they formed this nation and put things together. So I just want to begin candidly from that point of view. If your worldview starts with a more secular understanding of things, of course, many of the things that I'll say today would be things that you will not agree with. But that's okay as we engage in the conversation. Let me just share that I would offer 3 ideas or 3 contributions to the conversation that we are having in this session, and that the other 2 panelists will also speak to. Number 1, I am firmly convinced at the local level and at the national level that the church, that the faith communities of this country need to regain a robust, healthy revival of the sacred nature of marriage and family and human sexuality. We are a people who derive our understandings from our faith in God and our beliefs in God and maybe our view of sacred texts like the Bible, and we come to understand that there are things about this world that God has informed us about, and marriage is certainly a central thing that God has spoken to us about and that God was a part of from the very beginning. But in recent decades, we've lost our faithful commitment to the sacred and holy nature of marriage and family and human sexuality. Since the 60s, we've been on a crash course to de-emphasize and to change and be redefined in our values regarding this sacred institution of marriage and family. I think our commitment levels have been challenged. The divorce runs rampant. Our fidelity in marriage, our priority to the commitment of marriage, our faithfulness to purity in marriage, There are so many things in society that have attacked the very institution that we say is so important in our society and that we believe God ordained and spoke to at the very day of creation. You know, Jesus himself spoke to this issue when challenged about marriage in Mark chapter 10, verse 6 through 9. And what does he say? He says that, but at the beginning of creation, God made male and female. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. And the two will become one flesh, so that they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. We say that we believe in an institution that was ordained by God on the day of creation, and that Jesus affirmed as so sacred that we are not to tear it asunder. And yet, in the church and in the faith community across this nation, we know that divorce and infidelity and issues of pornography and lacking a commitment and materialism and various things have brought the family under assault. And I would suggest to all of us today that when our voice and our commitment to the very institution of marriage is as weak as it may appear to be today, that our words are a bit hollow when we speak to those who want to redefine marriage and look at marriage very differently, when in fact we are not living up to the commitment of the marriage institution that we say we believe in. And so a robust revival, a renewal, a recommitment to the very nature of marriage is needed across the faith community of America. And as we do this, I think we'll see the contribution that we could be making to this conversation increase in integrity and in substance. This last summer, not but a few days after the decision of the Supreme Court in June, my daughter and I, Callie, were on a trip together, a father-daughter trip that I take with my kids before they turn 13. And we were actually in Cincinnati, Ohio at Kings Island Amusement Park for a couple days. But then we decided to go across the river to Kentucky and visit a place called the Creation Museum. And I want to tell you something about that experience, because inside the museum there was a panorama of sorts of the Garden of Eden. I thought this would be interesting to look at this, and so we went inside and we saw the illustration of the Garden of Eden, a lush and beautiful place, a garden paradise, if you will, beautiful flowers and the arrangement. And as we walked from scene to scene in that creation room, we saw that Adam was called upon to name the animals as the creation story tells us. And then we came to the scene where Adam, for the first time, meets Eve. And I looked at my 13-year-old almost daughter and I said, Callie, do you believe that? Do you believe there was an Adam? Do you believe there was an Eve? Do you believe that God ordained that man and woman should come together and be the foundation of family? I said, Callie, because if this moment is true, as the pages of our Bible tell us, this is a sacred and holy moment. And we were both profoundly impacted by the understanding that this was not just a human institution, but in fact, an institution that God had ordained. And it impacted us together as father and daughter to renew our own commitment and understanding to the idea of marriage. And it's just precisely those kinds of experiences that all of us need to have. And our priests and our clergy and our pastors across this nation need to proclaim and preach with renewed integrity and vigor that we are a people and a nation that need to affirm that God is the one behind the idea of marriage. And that as the nation goes, or as the family goes, so goes the nation. That if we would commit ourselves to a renewed view of the sacred nature of family, our voice and our integrity in this conversation will only grow. But I think we need to remember that this is not going to be easy. There's a great challenge before us to do this. And society would tell us that if we're not perfect, then we don't have a voice at all. And I want to challenge that very idea. C.S. Lewis, the great writer, the great Christian writer, did a wonderful little treatment of this in a book called The Pilgrim's Regress. You might be familiar with The Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan, the story of a young Christian going up the mountain to the city of God and learning and engaging the various philosophies and theologies of the world. Well, C.S. Lewis thought it would be good to bring young Christian back down the mountain and re-engage those philosophies with his newfound Christian faith. And at one point, young Christian comes into a tavern on the way down from the mountain. It's called the Tavern of the Spirit of the Age, just like our time. We live in the spirit of the age. And inside this tavern, the young Christian asked for some nourishment, some refreshment. He asked for a glass of milk. He asked for a bowl of eggs. And Lewis writes that the waiter brings him these two things. And as he drinks the milk, immediately the waiter begins to mock him and make fun of him and say, "Do you know what you've just done?" And the young Christian says, "No, I've just drinking my milk." He said, you've drinking the secretions of a cow. And he compared it to the base idea of drinking really from the urine of the cow. And young Christian was confused at this. And then after he ate the eggs, the waiter said, you know what you've just done? You've eaten the unfertilized embryos of a chicken. How profane and how disgusting. And he began to mock him then again. And young Christian said, I don't understand. I was just eating eggs and drinking milk. And Lewis writes then this, that reason like a horse came galloping by the spirit of the age, the tavern of the spirit of the age, and swooped up young Christian. And as he galloped out of the tavern, the voice of wisdom said, sir, you have lied, for you have not distinguished that in nature there are things that are meant for garbage and there are things that are meant for nourishment. In this culture in which we live, we know that there are ideals, absolute truths, ideas of values that for those of us of faith come to this conversation. And we say that there are ideals and there are things that are good and there are things that are not so good. And we need to embrace that which is the good. Indeed, I find it ironic that it was the slaveholders of the 1800s who claimed that they had rights in their southern culture to own property and call human beings slaves. They were defending their culture and their rights by saying it was their rights to do this. But I think this nation decided that there was a right that those rights had to submit themselves to. That indeed our individual rights have to submit ultimately to that which is right. And I think the challenge to understand that there is many options in our society or many things that are being discussed right now about the context of marriage, but there is indeed a right view. There is a best view. There is a God-ordained view. And we who are the people of faith need that robust revival of the sense of what the sacred nature of marriage and human sexuality and family is all about. And we need to reclaim it, even though it's very challenging, even though society would tell us that marriage is an outdated concept and that it can be redefined in any direction, and more to follow beyond just same-sex gender marriage. And lastly, I would say to you that there is not only a need to reclaim the sacred nature of marriage and family, and we understand and we need to understand that the challenges of our society are going to continue to assault those of us of faith who believe that marriage is God's plan and God's ideal for society. But we need to practice a new form of conversation in our society. For many years, I've been involved in a Mormon evangelical dialogue here in Utah, and we have been using the art of convicted civility. You see, there are many people in society that are convicted, and there are many in society that are civil. It's just not that we find many that are both convicted and civil. The idea of being able to speak plainly about the things we believe and assert those things with confidence, but always doing it, as the Apostle Peter reminds us in 1 Peter 3:15, with gentleness and respect. I think as we look at the way in which today the proponents of same-sex marriage and the proponents of traditional marriage and natural marriage are pivoted against each other in the media and in various internet sites and forms of communication, that we need to be able to communicate neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, in the workplace and in our communities with convicted and yet civil dialogue. This was actually practiced in an experience that I had not just a few years ago in 2008 before the Prop 8 California decision was made and elected on. I was invited to speak at a conference in Austin, Texas on dialogue, and I went and made this presentation, and immediately after the presentation, two people came up to me and they were very angry at me. They had never met me, they didn't know me, but they just knew that I was an evangelical. And I was one of those people that probably believed in Proposition 8. And they said to me, and the lady that approached me was a lesbian, and the man that approached me was a homosexual man, and they both charged me together and said, what big deal is it to you that you would want to stop us and prevent us from loving and having a relationship called marriage? And as we began to interact, and as I began to figure out what they were upset about and how we were to interact, I said, can we just have a conversation about this? And we moved aside, and the conversation of the panel had kind of concluded, and we spent not just a few minutes, but many minutes together. Eventually, the gentleman did leave our circle of conversation. But this lady and myself spent about 2 hours in conversation. And point by point, I would let her explain to me how she understood life and how she understood her values and her worldview. And I would share mine, and back and forth we would go. And it was one of the most polite and helpful and instructive and clarifying experiences I've had in a conversation on the topic of same-sex marriage and same-sex gender attraction, and she was very informative to me. I closed this conversation that lasted nearly 2 hours by asking her if I could do one thing before we left each other. I said, you know, I have not tried to input my worldview or my spiritual beliefs on you, but it's been fascinating for you to help me understand why this is such an important area for you, and you've informed me on various things about your identity and your look at looking at your life as a lesbian woman. But I said, I wanted to share one thing with you if I could. And I said, I have not shared any Bible verses with you, but if I could leave you with one, only by permission, I would do so. And this lady, this very nice lady, said to me, you know, you've been decent, so you can share just one. And I said, there is a verse that informs me from the Bible about the importance of God's love for me. And I share this with you because I don't see myself as any better than you as a fellow human being. Your view of marriage, your view of sexual identity, your view of homosexuality versus my view does not mean that I'm a better human being than you. I said, I actually believe that all of us are sinners and we need God's love and forgiveness. And this verse tells me in Romans 5:8 that but God demonstrated his love towards us, and that while we were yet sinners and his enemies, Christ Jesus died for us. I said, I want you to know that God died for me because of my sin. And I believe that God loves you and died for you for your sins. And as long as we can continue to have this kind of conversation, America works. And I said, at the end of the day, we're obviously going to probably disagree. But I will show you respect, and you will show me respect, and you will honor my right to believe what I believe, and I will honor your right to believe what you will believe. And together as a nation, we'll have to form an ultimate decision on this matter. She said these words to me as I close. Well, I want you to know one thing, that I've never heard something like that verse you've just shared with me. She said, that's love on a higher level. That's love on another plane. That's the love that only God could have. And I said to this woman, you are more of a theologian than many that I have met. You get it. Indeed, the love of God is a unique love. And 1 John tells us that we can only love because we have first experienced the love of God ourselves. And so as we have this conversation about the nature of marriage and family, let's renew our commitment to the sacred nature of it. Let's realize it will be a challenge, but we've got to be faithful in that. And let's have convicted yet civil conversations with those who see things differently for the hope that we can see an America that will regain its commitment to marriage and family in the natural sense of the word. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.